Frank, thanks again for being with us at AgencyAnalytics to talk about the 7 capabilities framework. Today, we're going to talk about a very important component of these 7 capabilities, and that's the world-class offering. I mean, that's probably what a lot of agencies focus on the most, is the services they provide. You know, everything else, leadership, execution, all that stuff comes around it. But services are what define, you know, an agency for clients at first glance, because clients are looking for a solution to their problem. So
Right.
in the context of running an agency, either, you know, with a small team or you're a big agency, what does it mean to have a world-class offering?
The world-class offering is it's the heart of the revenue engine. So if we think about the first 2 capabilities that we discussed, those are really your growth operating system, your business operating system, right? Those 2 together form the foundation for how you go about developing the direction of the business, and then the habits, the protocols, the rituals, the routines that you and the entire team engage in to make plans and execute towards moving in that direction, right? So that's kind of like your foundational business skills. The next 3, which starts with world-class offering being first, the next 3, I would say, make up your revenue engine. So you have world-class offering, systematic sales process, and active lead generation. That's your revenue engine, if we were to kind of group these 7 capabilities. So the world-class offering says that we have an offering that clients rave about and never want to leave, right? In fact, the exact mission in the 7 capabilities framework is to develop and profitably deliver an offering that clients rave about and never want to leave. Like, that is the mission of the world-class offering area, you know, the person that ends up owning that area and running that area. And so there are a number of hallmarks that would make your offering world-class. But before we get into those, you mentioned something at the top of this conversation, in that most agencies kind of think there first, or think mostly about their services kind of being the core capability. And that's very accurate. The reason we don't put it first, however, is because regardless of the agency size, we must know where the company intends to go. And we must know who we aim to serve and what's going to make us different. And we must know the kind of people that we need to assemble to make it happen, right? That's part of your strategy. And then the next thing is, we have to have some sort of skill in developing a plan and managing the plan to get there. So what I would say is, when an agency is really small or even starting out, what they're going to do in those first 2 capabilities is probably a very light version, but we have to have something there as a foundation. And then, yes, most of the activities are going to be about the service, especially when the agency's small, because there really isn't a whole lot more going on. And the reality is, until that agency can get to, you know, $2-3 million, it's probably not yet proven that the offering works without superheroes, and oftentimes the founders superhero. So that's why it is the focus for so many firms. Even when they get those first 2 capabilities kind of established, the focus for a while is going to be the world-class offering, which is interesting because a lot of firms, when I meet them, they think their problem is actually lead generation. And while they do need to generate leads consistently, if they're driving leads into a business model that just fundamentally isn't built for scale, isn't built to go beyond the superheroes, it's going to break and become very chaotic. So the world-class offering, that's why it comes before some of those other things. And that's not to say we don't do activities to generate leads and we don't do things to collect cash. But in terms of where the founder finds his or her focus, the obsession of what they're trying to fix right now and what's going to take the firm to the next level, we do it in that order. And then, you know, we can dive into 5 hallmarks of what makes a world-class offering next if you want, or whatever questions you might have as a follow-up to what I just said.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up. So I've talked to a number of founders and agency leaders, and we've talked about services and how those services are first defined. Like several times I've heard stories about, well, I was a web designer, so I started kind of outsourcing my services as a web designer, and I turned into an agency. Or someone was like, I was really skilled at SEO, so we became an SEO agency. And that seems to be born out of kind of a natural necessity or a natural skills-based offering. So that's what they knew how to do well, and that's what they grew the agency on. But I want to, maybe dig a little deeper into what makes that world class, right? Because you can offer a good service. What makes it the best service? What makes it really just stand out? So maybe that leads us into hallmarks, or maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I do have some thoughts on that before we jump into the hallmarks of a world-class offering. One of the reasons why True North is so important is because if you have that practitioner that is really good at SEO, quote unquote, and then they finally strike out on their own, what's going to set them off in a direction that gives them a chance to have a differentiated firm and a differentiated offering is if they have a defined true north. Otherwise, they can end up with just a smattering of clients and solving a smattering of different problems and no real one value proposition. In fact, I talked with a founder the other day, been in business over 20 years. And, it's just wondering, what's the one thing that's going to send them to the next level and what do they need to do? And the reality is they've just resisted honing in on a specific problem for a specific audience and creating a specific transformation. So if you look at their portfolio, it's all over the board. If you look at the problems they've solved for those clients, it's all over the board. And again, that's what I call a superhero business model. To be able to solve any problem for almost any kind of business, you just kind of have to be a smart person and someone who's got just a rare skill in doing that kind of analysis and consultation. And that's not really great for scaling a company. It's hard to find those kinds of people. So the True North really does help move you in a direction towards enabling, making the world-class offering easier. Let's say that. And then, if we think about there's 5 hallmarks of a world-class offering that I talk about. When I run my clients through a growth momentum analyzer, which is a tool we have in the growth momentum method, there are about 14 different attributes that they rate themselves on in world-class offering. I'm going to share 5 that are kind of like a condensed summary. And those are repeatable, scalable, valuable, delightful, and profitable.
That makes sense. Repeatable, scalable, valuable, delightful, profitable being, the one that drives the revenue engine ultimately. So let's start with repeatable. So repeatable means you can do it over and over and over, systemize, right? The offering in a way, but I'll let you expand on that because you know better than I do. I'm just making assumptions.
Yeah, repeatable is that. Repeatable says that the thing we sell or the things we sell have a repeatable process associated with delivering that to the client. Now,
and are there services that are more that are easier to repeat a process in the context of an agency? Is ease of use or ease of repeatability a factor in that? I'll let you expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. So what would make something more repeatable than not is if the outcome we're trying to get to is really narrow, it's narrowly defined, it's really specific. If the number of skill sets in there are fewer than more, and this starts to touch on scalable a bit, but it's mostly about the process, right? That when you sell this thing, like the team has a process for how to deliver it, and you're not doing it a different way every single time. And so now we're really touching on scalable, because those are two different things. Scalable is your ability to find the people that can execute the process. So a great example of something that's repeatable and not very scalable would be the removal surgery to remove a brain tumor. There's a pretty standard process to go through when you're going to do brain surgery. Not all that scalable, because very, very few people can execute the skills, that have the skills to execute in that repeatable process, right? So if you look at the kind of people required to then execute on the repeatable process, that tells you whether or not it's scalable. So if your model is like, we're going to reposition brands and relaunch them into the marketplace and move them from, position 8 to at least position 3, you might have a repeatable process that's more strategic in nature, but now with each of those steps, it requires someone who is extremely seasoned, extremely experienced, extremely smart, who's really rare to find, to be able to run through that process and lead that process with a client. So that person's hard to find. And then, the elements within the process are also still somewhat ambiguous. The elements within the process, or the content that goes into the process, it still has a lot of variability. And so that's going to affect, your scalable score, if you will. How scalable is it? And so repeatable is the process. Scalable is, you can readily find the people who can execute the process consistently. Okay. So that's the check and balance against, yes, we have a process, but we have to go hire people who all have 30 years of experience to run this. And which is why you often see founders not being able to get out of any, client work, because they're always pulled back in to answer strategic things or lead the strategy part of the relationship. And then, I've got a team to execute, I just lead the strategy. Well, that's great. But what if your desire is to go to, say, 5 mil, who's going to do that? How are you going to do that? And so you got to go find another superhero like you. So that makes growing the firm, scaling the firm, a lot more difficult.
I had a quick question on scalability. So we focus a lot on people that execute. So that's part of the execution. How much and I mean, because we work in the digital sphere, when we talk about agencies and, being a SaaS company like AgencyAnalytics, we talk about tools a lot. So what's the balance between, in the context of product offering, the balance between people and the right tools for scalability? Does that come into play as well, or do you look solely at people?
Yeah, I think tools can come into play. I think that can help the scalability, right? So certain tools might do some heavy lifting that once took, a lot of time. So that's going to decrease time spent on the human labor side, which would make it more scalable. So tools are certainly part of that. In another methodology I developed, and this phrase kind of is similar. It's, process, platform, people, right? Platform being like your tech. And so tech and people are certainly part of, how scalable a thing can be, a process can be, and how much you can then extrapolate that out beyond just one team doing it, but you could have 20 teams doing it. And generally speaking, they're all doing it the same way, generally getting the same kind of outcomes.
Perfect. Yeah. I always bring it back to AgencyAnalytics in a way, because I have to tie this into it. But when we talk about offering, like, that's part of the offering to the client when you're an agency and you're using AgencyAnalytics, is using those dashboards, automated reports, and they're repeatable, they're process oriented, and they're also scalable, because you reduce your labor time spent on manually collecting all this data, and to give them that world-class offering, which is, great reports on their marketing performance, great reports on campaigns. So that's why I was bringing it back into focus there.
Yeah,
So thanks for the clarification.
certainly tech can improve your scalable score. Like if you were scoring yourself on each of these, certainly tech can improve that score. Um, the biggest variable would be the people. If they're difficult to find, and your process is repeatable, but it's really complex, and the content that goes into each step, if you will, or each phase has a lot of variability. That's going to impact the kind of people you have to go get. And
Yeah.
so now you're competing for rare talent. That talent's much more expensive. You're just going to affect your scalability of that offering.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, by the way, the other part of scalability is then um, how many job roles are required to fulfill the process. So that's the repeatable part. So like we have a process that's repeatable, and we need a designer, a developer, a copywriter, a project manager, and a fifth person. So that is going to be a process that requires 5 different roles is not going to be nearly as scalable as a process that requires just 1 job role or 2. And so that's the other part of scalability is, can you find the people, like readily find the people? And then 2, how many roles are required to execute that repeatable process?
Absolutely. Value, like what makes an offering valuable? I mean, I think I have an idea what makes a product or an offering valuable to a client in an agency context. But let's talk about it within the context of the world-class offering and the 7 capabilities framework. Value.
Yeah. So the valuable and delightful are 2 and 4 clients. So valuable to clients. So it's repeatable, for your firm. It's scalable for your firm. It's valuable for the client. It's delightful for the client, and then profitable for your firm. So these 2 are about the client. So valuable means that they're getting a return on their investment. And what I often preach, and I preach it in a general sense, there's certainly nuance when I say this for each firm as it applies to each firm. But I often say that firms should aim to be a 10x partner, which is to say that if the client invests, $1 with you, that ideally we can point to $10 being returned to them in some way, whether it's actual revenue we can identify, or an agreed upon value of leads generated, or an agreed upon value of time saved, something that we can then point to. You gave us $1 and we created $10 from that $1. That's what I would call a 10x partner. And the reason that's important is because if we look at the inverse of 10x, it's 1/10. And so what that's saying is that for every dollar of value that we're able to, every dollar of ROI we're able to identify, we're taking 1/10. Like 1/10 of it is the expense. And a lot of companies can absorb that. That's 10%. But when I hear agencies brag about that they're getting 4x or 5x ROI for clients on their ad spend, you're like, we got a 5x ROAS, 4x ROAS. Well, the 4x ROAS, if we do the inverse, is 25%. I don't know too many businesses that can absorb 25% of the top line dollar just being shaved right off. And they still might have salespeople they have to pay on their end. They still have to pay for the product or whatever it is the client bought. Unless you're selling like products that have 90% gross profit margin, 4x might work. But the vast majority of agencies are dealing with companies that don't have 90+% gross profit margins on their offering, on the client's product. So we really have to think about that. Like, what is the ROI that we're delivering? And I encourage people to what can you do to be a 10x partner? And the reason I encourage that is because now we're talking about a monetary value proposition that makes sense. And you increase the likelihood that even if your client has to tighten the belt during some economic tough times, you increase the likelihood that your firm could very well withstand that and stick around because you're the one thing that's working well for them. You're the one thing giving them, 10 times their dollars invested. And so the closer we can get to 10x or more, the better. We just increase the odds that that client will keep writing that check to you for a long time.
That's interesting. I'd never really thought about 10x versus 1/10, and I think that makes sense. And within the context of, like you said, 4x means you're taking a quarter of that as an agency, and you're not necessarily really upping that value for the long term for retention and for those like tougher times. Where does the delight come from? That's what I want to like, that delightful experience for the clients, the delightful offering. Maybe you can shed some light on that. That one seems a little bit more esoteric, but maybe there's something practical we can offer here.
I think when I think about delightful, I think about how much can we not put on our client's plate? How much as agencies can we have the client spend as little time as possible? Okay, so there's a number of things that can go into delightful. It's the communications are timely and clear, right? So how can we make sure that the communication's very timely, that it's clear and concise? So if we're giving our client, keyword reports, for example, well, how can we give them just, one summary page and keep it really concise? How can we make sure that the progress of long-term programs, the client's always aware about the progress and can see that in a concise way, right? So this is about the communication protocol. How can we make sure that the people we hire as main points of contact have excellent communication skills and excellent consultative skills with clients, so clients always feel like they leave those conversations with confidence. Things are moving forward. I'm confident in this team. I feel like I left with new information and I'm smarter, right? So there's the communication protocols that you establish, how you communicate. There's your main points of contact. Are they, good quality communicators and consultative people? We also think about onboarding. What is the onboarding experience like? Did we set the relationship up for success? Are the results extremely clear and they don't have to hunt for them, and we're delivering results sooner than later, sooner than expected? And then on top of that, you can do some things that are not required, but they certainly provide moments of delight, and little things that, maybe a book shows up that you recommend to all your clients. And so that shows up as a gift physically to them at some point in the relationship. Maybe once they hit certain milestones in the KPIs that you're aiming for, they get some sort of trophy or award or thing in, physically. It's like, you just hit this, the 2 comma club, or you just hit the 7x thing, or, 7-figure thing, whatever it might be. And so delightful is about mostly how much friction can we remove from the relationship? How can we help them spend as little time as possible dealing with what our part of the game is?
I love that expression, removing friction, removing barriers, reducing time to understanding, reducing time spent on communications, reducing the time spent on the intake process, making that intake process even easier. I just spoke with an agency leader recently, and one of the biggest things they did to scale was to really processize their intake process. which is a lot of process in one sentence, but to really systemize it, to build Monday.com boards, to build that kind of open communication using, Monday for visibility, using AgencyAnalytics for reporting, because you get that executive summary on your dashboard. It takes 2 seconds to understand this is what we've been doing over the last month. Thank you very much. Let's keep going. To remove that friction, I think, is probably my main takeaway from what you just said. And I think, that will delight and make your client interactions so much easier and make that client happy in the long run. But that's the goal.
Yeah, it's that, the starts with the onboarding. How clear and effective can you make it for the client? Clear and effective, right? And timely, clear, and effective. So they get it. It's clear what happens next and who they're supposed to talk to. Really effective at setting that up for success. But then also part of that onboarding experience is, do you build in moments of delight? Do they get a book? Do they get a welcome package? So we used to do welcome kits for our clients where they would end up with some, swag from our company, but also just some cool stuff the client would want to use as well. And so the welcome kit showed up, and then the email was the same every time, and it was structured a specific way to set things up for success. And the accounting team was introduced the exact same way every single time. And then I, as the CEO, would reach out with the exact same kind of message every single time, because they weren't talking to me, they were talking to my sales team. So, we had this whole experience baked in, and it just happened the same way every time. So that's just the onboarding, right? And then we set up the kickoffs the same way every time. And so that whole thing, which took place over the course of, a few weeks, that onboarding period was the same. And it was very delightful because it was timely. It was clear. They were well-informed. It was effective. We set everything up to get started the right way. And then on an ongoing basis, is the communication timely and clear and concise? Do we save the client time? Do we only require the most minimum amount of homework for the client possible, right? Like, how can we architect the service such that we're putting as little on our client's plate as possible, and always looking through that lens? And then, of course, making sure progress is always known and clear. So there's kind of like 3 big hallmarks for delightful.
It's interesting because delightful also works with repeatable, scalable, and valuable. Like that delightful experience connects those hallmarks that we just talked about before, and they lead to the 5th one, profit, because that's the goal as a business. If you're running a business, you've got a team, you're delivering a great service, and you're making it world-class, then you make it profitable. And you said that profitable part of it is specifically for the agency itself. Let's talk about that. Having said all we've said so far, how does that lead to profit?
Yeah, well, you'll notice that these are also in a specific order, just like the 7 capabilities are in a specific order to create the most momentum. These 5 hallmarks of a world-class offering are also in a specific order, which creates the most momentum, right? So when we sell something, we have to make sure we're selling things that are repeatable. We have to make sure that it's scalable so that we can go find people to do the work. We have to make sure that clients are actually getting ROI on it, right? So in that order, right? We have to optimize in that order. And so if you've got a repeatable process and it's scalable, you can find people, but the clients aren't getting ROI, it's not valuable. We can't worry too much about delightful and profitable just yet. What do we have to do to make this work? Okay, great. Now, how do we make this process delightful? Because when you do that, then the profit becomes easier to improve, because we have clients that are staying longer. We have clients that are referring. We have results that we can start to increase our rates and justify with the results that we're showing and the case examples. And so it enables profit to be easier. But profitable means that for the firm, when we look at the entire service offering, which is comprised of the people doing the direct work, Now, whether those people are in-house, quote unquote, or out of house, they're the direct people doing the work. There are people that manage the direct people doing the work. There's the head of world-class offering or the head of client services. And then finally, there's software and tools. So these are the 4 major expenses in delivering your offering. And my general rule of thumb is if you were to remove any one of those, would the offering break or erode in some way? And if so, then it's part of the cost to deliver the offering. So when we take that whole ball of wax and we compare what's left over, which is called your gross profit, or some accounting firms might call it contribution margin. So I don't want to get into an accounting nerd battle here, but let's just, for the sake of the conversation, it's the gross profit on our offering. When we look at the gross profit compared to the revenue, we get a percentage on that whole ball of wax. Okay. And I like my clients to aim for 60% gross profit on the entire ball of wax. Okay. And so if I have clients that are in mid 50s or low to mid 50s, I'm not mad at it. I prefer if they're high 50s, if not hitting 60 or low 60s. But certainly if it's low 50s or even below 50, we have a serious problem with the business model. Okay. Now there are some caveats. You might be a model that is specifically selling commoditized labor and you're just kind of like doing more of a staffing kind of solution. Yeah. Okay. We might look at that and see if it's a volume play, but generally speaking, when we're doing professional services and which agencies fall into the professional services bucket, I like to see that in the, high 50s, if not low 60s, when we look at that whole ball of wax. So what that means is on individuals, when you're pricing out, like for the individual producer in that contract, that means they have to be, that margin on that individual has to be higher than that, because we have to be able to absorb the indirect labor that's part of that machine. We have to be able to absorb the software and so on that's part of that machine. So that's why you'll often hear the old school, rule of thumb when pricing out your agency services or professional services, 3 times your labor, 3 times, your labor. So if you look at it that way, what that gives you, because remember, I'm a fan of the inverse, right? So what is the inverse of 3x? The inverse of 3x is 1/3, which is 33.67%. Okay. That's cost. So if we do the inverse of that number, we actually get 66.3%. So that's telling us that we have a 66.3% profit margin on just the labor. So that's why when you do it that way, as kind of a general rule of thumb, and you're doing what's called 3x, or they call it your direct labor efficiency ratio, DLER, 3 to 1. That's why if you aim for that number, what you're essentially saying is we're getting a 67% gross profit margin. And then when we take out, the indirect managers and then the software and the head of services, for the whole ball of wax, we could maybe end up, mid 50s, high 50s, maybe low 60s, depending on how much scale you're spreading this across. So that's where that old school 3x comes from on individual, when you're pricing it out on the cost of just the direct producers. And so that's still a generally good rule of thumb, although I like to encourage my clients to price to value, which is why valuable is so important. Because if we're able to show a 10x ROI, but yet, and then we compare that to 3x labor actually might be low. We might be able to come up to that 1/10 ROI number and increase our profit margin significantly while still being a 10x partner. So that's why it's important to look at both. What would the pricing be if we did 3 times labor? And then what would the pricing be if we did 1/10 ROI? And compare those two. And if the 1/10 ROI falls above your 3x labor number, raise your price now immediately, right? If the 1/10 ROI falls below our 3x number, we have to pause and say, wait a second, we got to maybe go back to the valuable part. We have to optimize for value. Why aren't we? Now you might end up to where you were an 8x partner, And that's fine. I'm not saying that you're going to go out of business if you're not 10x, but it's a quick little exercise. Take the ROI the client receives, divide by 10, compare that to your 3x labor number, and is the 1/10 number higher or lower? And if it's higher, raise your prices now, right? Because now you're getting even better than 3x on direct labor, which is going to affect your overall gross profit on the machine.
I'm not an accountant, but that made sense to me. Even though, there are certain parts where I would probably go to the operations person that's in charge of the world-class offering, right? So if we go back to the person that's in charge of world-class offering, they're the person that would be looking at those profit margins and would make those decisions and implement that in alignment with the true north and say, look, we have these challenges, or we're doing this well, so we need to readjust our prices, or we need to refocus the processes to make those numbers align and make sure that we are within the profitable part of the operation to fit the world-class offering and still deliver all that value, delight, and everything else to the client. So just to recap really quick and
if I could just
jump in, please.
Reply to that. So you're absolutely right. When we say the head of operations, it's synonymous. We're saying the exact same thing as the head of world-class offering. So operations is fulfillment of the offering. So the head of operations is the head of world-class offering. And you're right. The two KPIs that person has is gross profit percentage and client retention. Or if you don't have a recurring model, it's, SAT or repeat by, something that's about satisfaction, right? So it's those two things. So the head of operations is synonymous with head of world-class offering. And you're right. They're the ones who are responsible for optimizing those 5 things. The last one we talked about being the gross profit percentage.
Fantastic. I know we're running short on time, and I thank you again for always being so generous with your time and giving us all this info that is just so insanely valuable, delightful, and repeatable to use those terms that we've talked about today for agency leaders. I had one quick additional question just in relation to the nature of the offering that agencies are presenting to their clients. I want to talk a little bit about, niching, ICP, differentiation, competitive analysis, kind of in a nutshell, how much of that comes into play when defining what your world-class offering is, because that's something we talk a lot about with agency leaders, is finding the niche and defining who your ideal client is, because that's how you can make things maybe more repeatable, more scalable. So any thoughts on that as we wrap today?
Well, yes. I mean, that is an important element of True North. So in my model, when you're defining True North, there's vision, mission, values, brand, and bolder. Well, when we talk about the mission component, the vision is, here's where we see ourselves tomorrow, and it's our vision for ourselves. Mission is, here's what we're going to do in terms of activities to serve a specific market today to take us towards the vision. So wrapped up in the mission is that very specific definition. You use the word niching. It is that. It is, who's the primary client? What's their goal? What's their struggle? Who's the culprit creating the struggle? What kind of transformation do we aim to create? What service promises do we bring? How is what we're doing different? So that all of those things create a value proposition that you can get excited about, and you can start to create a differentiated story. So that way, those people that hear it, those people you identified, they resonate, they perk up, it hits them in the belly. And then your job is to craft a world-class offering that fulfills on what you promised in your mission. So to your point, it's absolutely critical that you figure that out, because it affects your world-class offering. Now, I have a number of clients that have their world-class offering pointed at a very specific audience because of what we defined in their mission, and they're solving a very specific problem. The reality is if they could probably take that same set of services and maybe just like do 1 or 2 things different and apply it somewhere else. But But together with the true north, and then together with the proof, it's now communicating to that target audience, we're for you. This solution is only for you. And look at the results that are being driven for people like you. And so it's very important, to answer your question, it's very important you define those things. It's very important you know those things. And that's why it's part of True North. Like it's bedrock, it's foundational to creating a firm that can go to a place that is differentiated and valuable for a given market.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we were able to bring it back into focus within the rest of the 7 capabilities within True North that way, because I think it will make sense for people who revisit the previous chapters in the series that we've created together and understand exactly how we got to where we are now with world-class offering.
Yeah, if you think about the first two, and there's probably a cool visual I need to make, but typically, like the way I've shown it is True North sits in the middle, and then your exceptional execution activities surround it. So that way, your exceptional execution activities always point to True North. But the reality is there's a structure to exceptional execution and specific activities, but the content of what goes in the execution is based on whatever problem you're solving in the other 5 areas. So for example, like when we're addressing world-class offering, that goes inside the execution part of the wheel. And we're using the process of exceptional execution to solve for a world-class offering problem, or we're doing that for an active lead generation problem, or for a cash and profit up. That's the content that goes in the execution wheel. And so it's always with True North at the center.
Maybe I'll throw that to our designers. Maybe I'll have them come up with some kind of visual that's this kind of 7 circles of capabilities. I was going to go Dante on it, but
Dante, the 7 circles of
positive.
hell.
No, go 7 circles of hell. Although for some agencies that are struggling,
it might be 7 circles.
It might be the 7 circles of hell, but in this case, it's 7 circles of success, right? 7 circles of
Well, the way I look at it is you've got your foundation that is this repeating process, and it's almost like a paint bucket, right? So we need to solve a world-class offering problem. It's like you pour that into the outer wheel, and then now it's colored with that. Like we're solving that problem, and then we're solving a little bit of the other and a little bit of the other, and we're using that process to solve those problems in those other 5 areas, always with True North everything's with True North at the middle. We don't violate True North in all of this problem solving.
Everything aligned drives success. Next time we'll be talking about sales, systematic sales. And I can't wait, because I know there's a lot of people out there that will want to learn about how to really make that a successful part of the capabilities framework. Frank, anything else to add about world-class offering before I let you go? I know you're a busy guy, and you've probably got a million things going on today. So final words, final thoughts before I let you
go. No, I think we covered it really well today. Again, I have, like 14 attributes I have people rate themselves on when it comes to world-class offering. Those 5 I gave you were like the condensed, summarized version. Yeah. I think if people think about those 5 in that order, they'll start to improve their offering systematically. Because again, the names of each of these are just retitling the common functions in every business. And I think that what most small firms don't realize is that if they learn these business skills, if they have this business knowledge from the get-go, then even when their firm is like under $1 million and they don't have all of these, they don't have people for every one of those functions, they can see and understand those functions still exist. Those functions exist whether we have people for them or not. The reality is that the founder's probably in charge of all of them, if not most of them. And there is not a specific, intentional, methodical approach to addressing each one of them and knowing which ones we just simply don't spend much time on and which ones we spend a disproportionate amount of time on. So I think that understanding that is really important, but it's also why world-class offering, after we have our business skills of the first 2 columns, it's why it's first. It's why it's the very next one, because if we don't have a world-class offering, I'm not too interested in figuring out how we have a sales process that's systematic and how we generate leads for it, because we're going to be sending clients into an offering that they're going to churn out of pretty quickly, that the team's going to get burnt out on pretty quickly.
Yeah. And as you said, time and time again, and as many leaders have said time and time again, the secret to a successful business is retention. It's just creating that value that keeps the client coming back to you, because they know they get what they need and they know they get it done well. So that's as simple as that. Please people with your world-class offering, they will come back. If you build it, they will come. To go full cliche and do the Field of Dreams thing. Frank, thank you very much again for a wonderful conversation. Can't wait to talk to you next time. I hope you have a great September. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, Francois. Take care. Same to you.
All right. Thanks, dude.
Bye.
See ya.